Hello and welcome to our session. My name is Nicole Lee and I will be your moderator today. I'm an assistant professor of communication at Arizona State University in the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences. And what we will be discussing today is how public relations and PR theory can contribute to our understanding of public engagement with basic science. This is a topic I'm very excited to talk about, and it is what I study, public relations and science communication. So I'm very excited to hear from our great panelists today. Before we get started, I think it's important to define public relations because it is a field that does have a little bit of a bad reputation because of a PR problem for public relations. PR is a strategic communication and management process that builds and maintains mutually beneficial relationships between an organization and its publics. The emphasis there on mutually beneficial. So despite media depictions of public relations practitioners, PR is not about spin or manipulation, but rather helping organizations listen to and engage with publics for that mutual benefit. Because of that emphasis on relationships, public particularly well suited to add to the conversation about public engagement with science and public engagement with basic science. Actually, both public relations and science communication have evolved in similar ways over the last several decades to put that emphasis on engagement, dialogue, mutual understanding. So it's about listening and engaging rather than manipulating and persuading. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panelist. Little change in the order today, but we're going to start with Maureen Taylor, who is professor and head of discipline in the public communication concentration in the School of Communication at University of Technology, Sydney. So I'm going to go ahead and share her slides here. Does not look like that is sharing.
Oh no.
We had a little change in order here.
I can actually just do it from my slides if you want. If you and I can talk it through. It's not that big a deal. So I'll just start. All right. So yes, I live normally in Sydney, Australia, but because Australia is closed right now, I am living in Tennessee. So I'm just coming from the East Coast right now. So my talk today is about public relations theory, and it's about changing how we tell the basic science story. My credibility comes from last couple of years I've been working with the WHO. Oh, here we go. Perfect. All right. Okay, next slide then. Excellent. For the last couple of years, I've been working with the WHO, both in the Pacific region as well as in Geneva, on helping them to tell the story about science and about health. And it came at a fortuitous time because in early 2020, WHO was faced with an enormous change. For the first 70 years, it generally had its member states and stakeholders as the primary people that it communicated with, right? The public was not its most important public. And over the last few years, they've actually shifted to thinking about how do they tell the science story to the public. They see themselves as the global science organization, and that the COVID-19 placed them not only at the center of the COVID-19 issue, but also on issues that it hadn't even really considered, things like debates around misinformation and disinformation. So my work over the last year and a half has really been helping them to consider how do they communicate with publics and how do they build support for the science story. All right, so what we see is that scientific organizations have really adopted social media as great tools for communication and public relations. And as those of us who study public relations, that's exciting, right? It creates a new way for organizations to engage with those audiences. The problem is, however, that many organizations are still using what we would call one-way communication strategies, thus underusing some of the amazing potential of social media for dialogue and relationship bonding. The story of science is constrained because of channel choice and the theoretical frameworks that are underpinning how we use it. The traditional model, the deficit model, that people don't know something, so it's our job to tell them, actually doesn't work that well. And we want to encourage you to think about alternative approaches. Next slide, please. The good news is that contemporary public relations theories have evolved and that they focus on mutual understanding, relationship building, and social capital. And the contemporary theories of engagement and dialogue that Nicole mentioned, they allow us to shift our channel choice beyond social media, right? They tell us that social media is a great tool for informing people, but that organizations and publics actually need to meet offline and they need to engage offline. That we need to think about strategic objectives beyond just one-way communication to thinking about long-term relationships. And we need to shift our understanding where meaning is created, right? So one of the changes in communication theory over the last few decades is that communication isn't just sender or receiver, but it's co-creating meaning. So organizations and publics co-create meaning together, and they essentially, when there's misunderstanding, it's both their faults. So the considerations is that science actually needs an engagement model that's two-way, participatory, deliberative communication in which the publics are active participants. And we need to think about things such as tiers of engagement. In 2018, this is a shameless plug, I co-edited a book on communication engagement, and we identified 3 tiers of engagement. And social media performs that first tier of engagement, but public relations contributes to other tiers such as dialogue and social capital. And social capital is a really great framework for thinking about the science story, because when population and audiences are well informed and can make better decisions in their lives, not just around health, but about other things, then communities develop and retain and use social capital. Next slide. So there's a bunch of ways forward. Social media can help draw audiences into conversations that can improve their understanding of science, and it can also increase their level of trust in scientific organizations. But they also need to create offline engagement as well. And so public relations can help you do this. It can help organizations understand publics, adapt and change to meet evolving public expectations. And that's really, a modern approach to public relations, is that public relations helps organizations anticipate and change in advance of societal expectations. So if we can do that for organizations, then we can definitely do that for science. Next slide. So I guess the end of my point is this: science is an evolving story, and public relations can help tell it. My argument is that we need to change the theory and the model that scientists are using. We need to change the channel to go past social media, and by doing that, we can change the outcomes of science communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Before we move on to our next panelist, I do want to let everyone know that we will be having Q&A at the end, and to please submit any questions on the Q&A tab, not in the general chat, so I can make sure to monitor that and get your questions answered. So our next panelist is Kathy Rowan, who is an Emerita Professor of Communication at George Mason University and a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science.
Thank you, Dr. Lee and Dr. Taylor. What social conditions support communicating basic science? By social conditions, I mean factors, the ones really Dr. Taylor was just describing. What are the conditions that lead audiences to think and feel a certain way, and the communicators to think and feel a certain way? Next slide, please. Imagine yourself looking at this blank screen, and it's the beginning of a little video, a short video you're watching. And behind this blank screen, a voice comes up, or a sound comes up, and it says clack, clack, clack. Next, you hear a voice. It's a young man speaking, and he says, "Do you hear that clack, clack, clack sound? That's the sound of dead oysters. That's a terrible sound if you are an oyster farmer." Next slide, please. The young man speaking is on the right. His name is Joey Matt. He's at Virginia Sea Grant, and he studies why we have mass oyster die-offs sometimes. Next slide. Here's an oyster. Here's what he's studying. And so if we were watching this video, the next thing we would see is Joey sitting behind a table, and he's got piles of oysters in front of him. And he's trying to figure out which oysters are healthy and which ones are sick. And he's inviting the audience to look at the insides of the oyster and think about this with him. Next slide, please. I tell this story because I want to showcase Joey's approach. Look at the second bullet. Notice what he's not doing. Joey is not beginning by saying, I'm important Joey Matt, and you need to learn my research. Instead, he's casting this whole enterprise as a detective story. And detective stories let all of us play. They invite the audience in to puzzle with them and think not just about the result, but the method of the scientist. This best practice is consistent with a National Academy's report, whose co-authors include Bruce Lewinstein, the kickoff speaker this morning. If you type in learning science in informal environments on your browser, you'll get that report. You can download it free. Next slide, please. But some of you might be wondering, hey, wait a minute, isn't figuring out why there was a mass oyster die-off, isn't that a classic example of applied science? And I would say, yeah, it is. But the point would be here, there's basic science underlying that event. Why? Why do we have a mass oyster die-off? Is it the environment? Is it genetics? So the puzzle that is important in this panel is that first one in green. How might scientists build, just like Dr. Taylor said, build long-term relations so that they can interest people who might be interested in the basics or the background of the topic they're exploring. And then to the blue copy there, that's what public relations scholars, as well as land-grant and sea grant universities can do. We can help scientists explore puzzles like this. We can help them think about best ways to identify key audiences who want to partner with them and want background on some scientific topic. Next slide, please. Oh, and there's, wow. And there's Keegan giving me, there's what the book looks like. And I can't say too many wonderful things about this book. Normally I wouldn't go quite so nuts about a book, but this is almost bedside reading. It's really, really interesting. It's classic examples of times when, like one quick example, they did a whole example of how to get college students excited about science by getting them into a sustainable fashion and sort of deepening their understanding of what do we mean by sustainability and sustainable fashion. So this free book, your tax dollars paid for it, is really great. So back to Joey. Here's an audience that is interested in his basic science. These are people taking a class sponsored by Virginia Sea Grant, where they're going to they'll be certified as master oyster growers. And they are exactly the sort of audience who would like to know more about the basics, the background, as they call it in the quote, of oyster science. So again, our job in public relations is to support the finding of a key audience like that and to support scientists in working with, in feeling comfortable and effective, reaching out and having a long-term relationship with people like this who may be able to assist them, in fact, probably can assist with their fundamental basic science. And with that, let me hand this to our next speaker.
All right, our next, Katherine McComas, who is Professor of Communication at Cornell University and Vice Provost for Engagement and Land Grant Affairs.
Thanks. And I have no slides, so you can shut that off if you'd like. So oops. Why don't I go ahead and just jump in and say thank you. I'm delighted to be a part of this panel, and I'm also delighted to follow my first two panelists' colleagues, because I think that what the audience will hear are some reinforcing themes. So, you know, when I was approach to do this panel and in thinking about how to frame my remarks, in thinking about the question, why should we engage the public in basic science? I decided to start with a more fundamental question: for whom are you conducting this science? Perhaps because of the notion it is basic, it seems somehow removed from the public, but I can imagine that most scientists can connect their research to a wider public purpose. As the title slide that I guess will remain on says, that I serve currently as Cornell's Vice Provost for Engagement and Land Grant Affairs. Cornell is a land grant university. It has a land grant mission which says that it needs to conduct research and generate knowledge that benefits the residents of New York State and beyond. And at Cornell, as in many universities, not just land grant universities, advancing knowledge for the public good is a part of our DNA, our core principles. But it's not to say that the questions of why should we don't come up. And I would put forward that there are 3 arguments supported by research that address this. And while my focus may be most acutely the university context, I would argue that these apply widely to other research institutions and scientific organizations. And so 1, by engaging with the public, you develop better research questions. 2, by engaging with the public becomes more informed about the science and the scientific methods and the scientists themselves. And in a university context, many of these scientists are your neighbors. You shop at the grocery store with them. Your children are on baseball leagues together. And 3, by engaging with the public, the university builds stronger trust with the public, including the communities that it neighbors. And again, we talk about these as town-gown relationships, and they are key. They are quite a lot of things that we talk about it in a university setting. Our research in this area has shown, and I'll shout out to John Besley, who I believe is as a speaker at this meeting at some point in time, has shown that neighboring communities are more likely to trust the university and the research it conducts, including very basic research on energy, on nanotechnology, agricultural biotechnology, stem cell research, when they believe that the scientists and the decision makers share their values and respect their viewpoints. But how will they know if they do unless the scientists engage with them? And our research shows in that same study that a lot of people just don't know how scientists and leaders would behave. And we have looked in other areas at networks like the cooperative extension networks that our land grant universities have across the US as a way to make those connections, to bridge those divides between scientists and members of the public. Research and experience also confirms that scientists should not view public engagement as a one-time activity, but as a process. And building trust takes time, and memories of past infractions, real or perceived, will influence the public's willingness to engage and trust your organization. And this can be particularly true in Indigenous and Black communities and other communities of colors that have suffered injustices, sometimes on the behalf of those very universities in the past. At our university, we spend a lot of time focusing on what we call pre-departure planning for faculty, staff, and students to really work with them, to help educate them about things that they need to be aware of before they go out to make those connections with community members, so that they go out with humility, they go out to listen, and an eagerness to understand what questions that they should be asking before they arrive on the doorstep of a community and say, I know how to solve your problem, without even hearing from the community member about what those problems may be. And this brings me to my final point. What's the incentive for the scientists to do this? Sounds like a lot of work. And it brings us full circle to this question of why do we conduct our research to begin with? If it is for the public good, then engaging with the public will help us build better research questions that can lead to the positive impact downstream that we seek. It also can help us to grow a community more engaged with science and build stronger trust with your organization's leadership and the scientific community. Thank you.
So unfortunately, Jeong-Nam's unable to get his microphone to work. He was so gracious to log on and do the slides for us. So thank you, and I'm sure he will add to the chat if to the Q&A as well. But I'll start first couple questions from the audience, and this is one that came up when Kathy Rowan was speaking. So I'll go ahead and have Kathy start with this. But you mentioned that long-term relations, or mentioned long-term relationships. Does engagement require a long-term commitment?
Erica, that's a great question. I think that my fellow panelists would have a good comment on that as well. Well, here's my experience with Virginia Sea Grant. The way they like to partner with lots of the universities in the Virginia area, in Virginia, to bring us all into thinking about the health of the Commonwealth, the health of the coasts, and the health of the communities that live in coastal areas. And so what we wind up doing is projects like a master class for oyster growers, or a science communication online experience that marine scientists across the state could take, or like a seafood festival, or a showing up at an aquarium and having a hands-on experience that children could experience. So I kind of take the question underlying your question, Erica, that a long-term commitment sounds like a lot of work. And that's exactly what I think people in public relations, land grant, sea grant, universities in general, we should think through what's a realistic ask for these scientists. Should we invite them into the seafood festival? Should we invite them to partner with us on a particular situation over time? We know Dr. So-and-so will tell us about something, or we'll learn from him. We'll get on his boat and we'll go looking for something in the Chesapeake with him. To me, some of it should be the scientists, and they should be supported by science communication training. I'm on a team right now, a group of people that include John Besley, where we're going to assess the Alan Alda science communication training.
Oh, yeah.
American Association for Advancement of Science has science communication training. Right now, we don't know which approach to communication training is the best, but we've got John on our team, and and he's focusing us on questions to think about how do we help scientists prioritize. Really, I think he probably would say long-term relationships that don't swamp their career. But I'm very interested what Maureen and Katherine McComas would have to say as well, and Nicole.
I'll go then, since you put my name first. So, I think of engagement as conceptualized and operationalized, and there's a variety of measures that we can use. But I also think of it as an orientation, right? So think of engagement, and just like you'd think about relationships, we have friends and people we don't see for a long period of time, but that relationship exists. The feeling for one another and the satisfaction when you do see each other. So for those of you who might be concerned, like, oh my gosh, we're going to be spending all of our time on community engagement, we're not going to have any time for science. The answer is no. The answer is you engage and you find people who are interested, you work with them on something, and then you hope that the relationship exists during the times when you're not working together, and that you can leverage that relationship again when you need them or they need you for something else. So that's number one. And number two, there are a variety of measures and ways that we can study engagement if we think about it as a relational outcome, right, of people engaging. And so there's satisfaction, mutuality, and a variety of other measures, which is sort of another question that came in here. Dr. McComas?
Happy to just jump in and say that, I mean, what my co-panelists have said is right on. I think that where we err is, I mentioned the historical and sort of the long memories aspect, because there is a lot of memories of scientists sort of, they call it parachuting in communities to try to solve their problems, or they've used a community to get an NSF grant on broader social impacts. And they really haven't thought about about long-term engagement and what it means as an outcome. And a lot of these things are also was what is benefiting the public from this relationship too. It's often viewed as very one-sided. You know, we want our publications in the end, but what are we really doing for the community partners and the members of the public? Are they co-authors on our publications? Does that matter to them? Are there other ways that we can give back to the community? What are the benefits to them? And it's really, again, we often view these as very one-sided, I guess traditionally, because those are the ways that we are rewarded, for instance, in academia, our publications, our grants. These sorts of long-term relationships take time, and sometimes they're not necessarily rewarded. And so I think we have to look very honestly also at how do we set up these relationships and going in the relationships, and then if there is an exit strategy, and what does that look like in a way that, again, you know, I love the old saying from camping, leave the campground cleaner for the next people that may come. And I think that there's a lot of work that's done out there that's left a lot of messy campgrounds, and we have inherited that, but it's our chance also to go in and try to make it better going forward.
That's great advice. All right, our next question is from Chris, and building on communication PR expertise, do the speakers have any recommendations for concrete measures of successful engagement that they would recommend? Anyone want to start?
That sounds like a Dr. Taylor. Well, I guess both of you, Dr. Taylor, all three of you, I think.
Dr. Lee, you go first. That would be 14.
I thought I was moderating here. You are
No, you're an expert.
So concrete measures of successful engagement. So I'm not sure if Chris is asking about actually like the measurement and outcome. That's what it sounds like. Well, it really depends on what the public schools are. So that always comes down to research, really knowing what you're trying to achieve through engagement and what those measures of success would be among your public. So again, going back to that mutual benefit, is the mutual benefit on excitement? Is it funding? Is it knowledge for your public? That is, and then figuring out how to measure it, which is not super concrete, I know, but like so much of what we do, it comes down to, it depends on your individual circumstance.
And, you know, back to what Dr. McComas said, right? We always have our goals and our objectives, right, in public relations and strategic communication, what we want to achieve. But true engagement actually sits down with our target audiences, our stakeholders, and says, what do you want out of this, right? So the objectives are actually created together. So what does the community want? Do they want to be more empowered to make better decisions about how they spend their tax dollars? They want to have better understanding of how clean their air and water are and how they can make it cleaner. So I think there's a two-sided of it, and it's a huge change, right? The engagement approach is a huge change from business as usual, not just for organizations and government, but for all types of agencies, right? To push and to create, to have a public as a partner is so hard, and it's so fraught with risk and the fear of failure, right? Nobody wants to fear in public, but truly, when you have partners, they bring resources that you didn't even know, and they can help scientists and universities and everyone else to achieve community goals that create social capital.
I just add in a couple from the procedural justice literature. We've looked at the perceived legitimacy of the outcomes. We've looked at people's willingness to engage again, kind of going back to my common refrain, if we've sort of ruined them and they never want to engage again, we've done poorly. Satisfaction is certainly one that we look at, satisfaction with the process, trust, our others aspects.
Have anything to add, Kathy?
You know, I'm just reading JN's comment in the chat, and let me see. I know one key point that he emphasized was, well, I think it's just another way of saying what Dr. Taylor and Dr. McComas just said, sort of resources that each group brings, or is there a common resource that would benefit the scientists and the interested publics? It sounds like one good question to keep asking. And I'm just noticing, yeah, let me pause on that and let you send it back to you, Nicole.
Great. Thanks so much for bringing this perspective in. And the next question is specifically for Maureen. Can you talk more about spaces beyond social media?
Sure. So social media, again, they're a great foundation, right? They're a great way of getting communication out for fostering what we might call early tiers of engagement, right? So people, they follow, they might like, they might comment, they might share. But then we actually have to move it to the interpersonal. And the interpersonal now, after COVID-19, all of us can be interpersonal with and mediated through Zoom and Skype and everything else. I'll give you some examples from my WHO work. So we have World Health Days, right? So tuberculosis, No Tobacco Day, hepatitis, all of these days. And social media is the way that we, you build information out, you tell people about it, but then it's actually on the ground and it's in local communities where events take place. And those events are culturally sensitive and they are based on the people who live in those communities and the needs that they have. So online start, offline or face-to-face finish. And then you can continue the conversations and continue the relationship online. And then you find another opportunity to come together. So think of it as the social media might be the connective tissue of the relationship around information and questions, but that the interpersonal interaction, whether it's mediated or in a community, is what actually strengthens the relationship and then also provides benefit, tangible benefits to the people who participate.
Anyone else want to add?
Just one point. This conversation is helping me think. So I'm in a group of people, a group of scientists who are trying to study training methods for scientists. So how do you train scientists to be good communicators? And my piece of the task is to recruit scientists at George Mason University. We have 3 approaches to science communication, and we don't know which one is the best one. So this is kind of a shout out to scientists at George Mason and other universities, maybe volunteer to be part of our study. And maybe what I need to do is reach out to interested publics who might identify scientists that ought to join our study so that we can figure out what are good ways to support scientists in communicating effectively.
Mm-hmm. And that's where Jeong-Nam, if he was online, would probably jump in because his specialty is how do we identify publics? Mm-hmm. And his argument is you can't be effective until you really know your publics and what they want and how they get information and how they get involved. So his argument would be you identify those publics and then you bring them in and then they become partners in the process. So I hope I channeled him well.
Yes, no. Dr. Taylor, that's a great point because you're right. I have this broad idea of ask people, and I got to get it much more precise.
Narrow it down. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So our next question is, America, how do we break down the silos between PR and the science communication or science engagement community? And I'll add the first answer to that, and it's platforms such as this. So this start for that.
And I have a second idea, co-editing or editing special issues of journals across each other's area. So perhaps a special issue of Public Relations Review on science communication, and then perhaps a science communication issue around public relations and science. I mean, that's at least one way to get the 2 groups reading each other's work and seeing what we have in common.
Such a great question. And I feel like it is, I just want to echo, I think it is groups like these. I think that it is us and our interdisciplinary spaces that mildly correct or push back against stereotypes of one or the other and really look for opportunities to find the common ground upon which we can build the foundation going forward. And I think that that's something that, we have to be mindful about. And some departments bring all of those folks under some roofs, and others and other times they don't. But I think we just have to continue to work and leave any stereotypes or assumptions at the doorway.
I I think Dr. McComas and Dr. Taylor see this from you when you're in a position on high. Sometimes you see ways we could bring each other together. I guess one more idea that I think is related to Erica's question is the National Science Foundations, the way they write their grants, some of their grants, they push us to try to think about science big ideas. And you read the call and they're clearly trying to get, cell biologists, molecular biologists, and artificial intelligence to talk to each other, and they already do, so it may be that basic tension in all science between, no, you have to specialize, you have to stay in your discipline, that Thomas Kuhn idea that you can't do science unless you stay in your discipline and proceed carefully, versus what the National Science Foundation is trying to do is actually there are these big problems, and unless we all try and work together on a problem, we won't solve it. And I think both can get to basic science, and I think there's some basic science that has to happen when you work on a grant with multidisciplinary teams, because we don't know each other's fields. So there's just one more way. Maybe public relations could help us with how do you team in those multidisciplinary grants and be effective.
I will read an answer from Jan as well. So he's common expertise between two fields. While science communication is more interested in educating and informing, while science PR distinguish different publics and potential conflicts of interest between science institutions and their constituencies and publics. PR could add more values of alignment of interests in and around science and scientific issues and agendas. So thank you, Jan, for that. And he also says to all attendees and participants that he can share his slides. So I'll put the email address in the chat as well, so you guys can have that. All right, another question from Erica. How do we support relationships? So great point about broader impacts, but how, and there was another question very similar to that. But basically, how do we support relationships both between science and publics? And I'm thinking that might also be in regard to public relations and scientists.
Mm-hmm.
If I could, one idea that came up in the morning session, I'm wondering if Dr. McComas and Taylor might comment on it from the point of view of kind of administrators. Someone was suggesting in Bruce Lewinstein's session that we require all scientists to prioritize long-term relationships with the key public. So we all know how academics react to requirements. That approach, I see where the suggestion is going, but I wonder if there's without issuing a command on high, would there be a way of making maybe say it the way John Besley does, prioritizing science communication with interested publics, or with some appropriate segment of the public, part of our promotion portfolios?
I mean, this is something that we think a lot about at Cornell, and it's part of my job to think a lot about it too. And I don't think that we should require every scientist to do this. That said, I do think that we should encourage more, and certainly be there to meet the willing with the preparation tools, such that they can go out and do that. And I think that in turn, your point about the promotion and tenure, again, really strikes at some of the most fundamental, because we can't make such a requirement without ensuring that we have the full wraparound to protect, say, junior faculty or others that are spending a considerable amount of time and may not be getting the rewards for it. So it has to be a wraparound. But that said, I mean, I do think that there are ways that we should look to grow this, but it needs to be done carefully. And we need to think, perhaps when we think about long-term relationships, we come back to this point of benefits. What is in it for that community to continue to do this? Are they seeing some reciprocal benefits? Are they indeed having cleaner water? Are they indeed having a better pipeline for their K through 12 to places that are important to them to go? Are there resources? And there's another lively discussion about resources coming from the university often to support these community partnerships, money, to put a fine point on it, and how that also helps, because what we're asking in a lot of ways is for community members to volunteer their time to work with us for this. And if those benefits are not clear, what you might be doing is taking advantage of a lot of their time and really then leaving and making your publication and all is said and done. And so what are the ways that we can help to provide them support for, say, supervising our interns, of which we send hundreds and thousands into these organizations every year. So those are just some of the thoughts on that end.
And I have a managerial approach to that. The argument is what gets measured gets done, right? So, NSF and others can place in their application process the idea of social impact as a sustainable contribution or component of applications. So that, and other funding organizations as well. So social impact can be one of the ways that we measure what we do. And that is not something that just happens in a program, but it's a long-term implication. And we should give incentives for organizations and scientists and scholars to maintain relationships with their publics and their communities.
Great. So time for one last question. We just have a couple minutes, and I think this is a great question from Soo-Yeon Kim. Sometimes predispositions and values, such as political ideology, science issues get politicized and boundaries between scientific facts and misinformation blur. How can we approach the public who strongly rely on their predispositions to understand and engage in science?
I think that's one of the most important questions. I bet every single one of us has friends and family who are angry at science. They're angry at what they perceive as mixed messages. They're about COVID. They're angry about climate change, and they're angry that too many people in the academy are Democrats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I read that literature, and I guess one thing I learned from the science communication training literature is to try to interact with those people like a friend, like a family member, from a position of empathy and kindness, and start there, and be a really good family member, be a really good neighbor, be a really good friend, so that at minimum they can say, well, all right, that person is from that awful university, but they sure were nice, and that's a little tiny thing. And then we've got to do a lot more than that. But I think there is something powerful by just staying in your lane, in your relationship, and doing a good job in that role. I'm really interested in what the other panelists would say.
I think you've said it really well, Kathy. I think that we have to, as a colleague, Mike Shapiro at Cornell would say, don't ever think of people as irrational. They often have very rational reasons for why they're behaving that way. And so again, not going in with the assumption that this person is just completely all wet, but really trying to listen and understand and hear where they're coming from. It takes time, and it needs to be done over time, typically in a interpersonal type of setting. But I'm sure that, we'll be thinking about these things for quite some time.
Anything to add in the last
The last two comments were perfect. Nothing to add.
Perfect. Thank you.